All right. So thank you very much, Brian, for coming today. Everybody, I have invited Brian McKinney from Grid 202 Partners to join us today for a discussion about a not very widely used, yet what I feel incredibly important technique of having clients who have the potential of receiving a very large jury award or receiving a very large settlement to be able to work with a financial advisor around the money that they receive. Now, from a psychological standpoint of view, the reason that I recommend these types of things occurring and why I recommend people like Brian to be able to assist clients is specifically because of the power that goes behind a statement that says, my client has signed an agreement that any money that is received will go into control of a financial advisor who will help to maximize investments, but also be able to monitor and watch this money to ensure that it is going out in the avenues and directions that it should, like paying for medical bills, replacing lost wages, but not necessarily in a massive chunk, but more in a regular payout, almost like an annuity. But Brian will be able to cover those things because I'm definitely not a financial wizard by any means. That's why I have Brian here to be the financial wizard for all of us. But I do think that it is very important. And when we think about what's happening in COVID-19, and I was just reading the newspaper today, and the amount of individuals who filed for unemployment in the nation this past week has now breached around 850,000. And last week it was about 740,000. So we've seen about 100,000 more Americans applying for unemployment. And when we think about COVID and we think about tough financial times, and we think about what's going to happen when these people are sitting on juries, is that we have to take into consideration that there is a distinct possibility, and maybe even more probable than not, that we're going to see a reduction in jury verdicts when it comes to juries and how they are focusing, coping, and dealing with COVID-19 and the economic crisis that we are still just in the beginnings in. It's very important to be able to maximize the techniques that we have to be able to ensure that we can preserve a jury's ability to feel empowered and okay enough to levy an $11 million jury verdict, or for in settlement negotiations, for all parties to feel comfortable that the money that's going to be delivered will be, in a sense, managed appropriately. Now, I understand there's a lot of social ramifications when we talk about these types of things, about who's going to manage the money and why we want people to have money managers. I think that is for a different discussion than what we have going on today. I think that what we really have going on today is really talking about the importance behind why we would have a client agree to have a financial manager manage the money for them. It's not a new practice. There's a series of companies all around the country that do this for trial lawyers and their clients. So I think what I'm going to do now is just hand it over to Brian, so he has an opportunity to talk a little bit about his company and talk a bit about his background and who he is, so we can all get a chance to get to know Brian and understand what he does. So Brian, man, thank you so much for being here today. This is a great opportunity for all of us to learn a lot about what you do and how it's applicable in the civil arena with litigation. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. I appreciate you inviting me in for this really, really important discussion. Just by way of introduction, again, my name is Brian McKinney, and I'm a senior wealth advisor at Grid 202 Partners. So Grid is an independent wealth management firm based in Washington, D.C. and North Carolina, but I work here in Denver, Colorado. We serve both individual investors and institutional investors really with a special interest in ensuring that client investment assets are aligned with their morals and values. A lot of wealth management or investment firms really focus on just investments. We take a different approach. We really like to look at the comprehensive picture, right?
Mhm.
Investments are important, they're a piece, but you also have to think about risk management. You got to think about taxes. You got to think about long-term projections, cash flow. All of these different things are all encompassing and included in our comprehensive approach that we take. Just to give you an idea of kind of my background and where I come from, I've been a certified financial planner since 2008. I started my career on Wall Street as an investment analyst in New York, and then moved into financial and estate planning for ultra high net worth families. So that's working with, 20, 30, 50, 100, $200 million families, really developing comprehensive financial plans. Now, these folks had a lot of money and they weren't so much worried about running out, but they were worried about other things, right? Generational wealth transfer, estate taxes, really living their values, philanthropic giving, all those types of things come into play when you're dealing with clients with that level of wealth. I've also been a portfolio manager for U.S. Trust, the private bank of Bank of America, where I manage roughly $500 million in investment assets for high net worth clients, including trust accounts. There I learned the importance of having a deeper conversation than just talking about investments, because you're talking about passing money on to the next generation. You're talking about trust accounts where you have beneficiaries of those trusts that may be spendthrifts. They may not be able to manage that money. They may be always requesting that money. So you have to be able to develop a relationship and develop a rapport and provide really objective advice or objective principles when you're dealing with those beneficiaries, because when they're knocking on the door, Peter and you, we'll talk about this later, but when those folks are knocking on the door asking for money, consistently to spend on who knows what, you have to be the person that stands behind principles and say, no, we had a plan, we had a strategy, and we have to implement that strategy, right? This wasn't in the plan, right? Your friend asking for money wasn't in the plan. Investing in all these types of franchises, that wasn't in the plan. This money is supposed to provide for your life, your living, your goals, your objectives, and not for some of this other stuff that you're talking about today. And those are tough conversations to have. But I think they're important conversations to have, and the earlier you have those conversations, the better. So again, Peter, I am glad to be here with you today. I think this is an important topic, as you said, as COVID continues to cause economic angst. You see the economic uncertainty today as jury awards are likely to be reduced. We got to think about ways to not just make that money last that's awarded, but to make it grow. And I'm happy to do that with you here today.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it. You said a lot of, great stuff. And I love the idea behind the fact that you are familiar with very large portfolios, and your ability to manage them, and the recognition between the difference between a family that might be living in extended years of multi-generational wealth and passing that wealth down from generation to generation to individuals that might find themselves in what appears to be a very wealthy situation. I mean, you brought up some great points about the idea that sometimes when people all of a sudden find themselves in a great amount of wealth, there's a certain level of generosity and love, frankly. I think it's always out of these malicious rationales to want to share what they have received. Yet there's a necessity that there has to be a plan. And I love that you brought that piece up, because when it comes to, jury verdicts, as we both know, when an individual, let's say, receives, 11 or $15 million, it's usually because there's a lot of stuff that is going on there. They're not just leaving the courtroom, skip to the loo, my darling. You know, they might be in a wheelchair, or there might be some other very severe issues that have occurred that bring a person to a place of receiving this kind of money. So in a sense, when a jury delivers their verdict, they're delivering that verdict with a budget that has been earmarked for living expenses, for the necessity that you might need to alter your house. So you might have been a person who could fully ambulate and then had a low spinal injury that requires you to be in a wheelchair or use a walker. And so what does that mean about moving from one floor to the other, or living in a house, or being able to reach cabinets? I mean, this, you know, the money is earmarked in a you know, to ensure that all of these things occur. And that I think it's you know, I think it's fascinating. Of course, being a psychologist, I'm always interested in, you know, the psychology behind why people are behaving the way that they behave, and why they think the way that they think. But you know, as we talk about individuals who receive you know, a large amount of money, it would seem to me, and certainly I think, you know, you would be the person to comment on this, there's probably a wide range of emotions that you see from various people when they come to you and say, you know, Brian, I now have this amount of money, you know, please help me do what it is that I'm supposed to do with this. So, you know, I just what I think would like to tease out a little bit more about just some of what, you know, the initial process would be, because it's, you know, it would be very important for trial lawyers to be able to introduce this topic to a client and be able to have some important things to say. You know, look, I'm recommending Brian here as an individual who can, you know, if we win this jury award or we settle this case, that I would like to, you know, introduce you to Brian to help manage the money. What would you want a trial lawyer to be able to say to their client about you and about what you do that would show how helpful and important it is for a person to be able to help you, to allow you to help them manage their money?
Yeah, that's a great question, Peter. So typically when I've seen clients come in to sudden wealth, I see two distinct scenarios. The first one is the client gets this money and sees, you know, let's say it's, you know, $10 million, right? And they don't see what you said earlier, that it's allocated for certain expenses. They just see the $10 million and they just start spending. They start giving the money away to friends and family. They start buying houses. They just start spending the money, because it's for a lot of folks, this is the most money they've ever seen. And in their eyes, they do not see that it can end, right? Once you start talking about millions and millions of dollars, all sense of reality kind of can go out of the window, and you start thinking this money is going to last forever. You know, what's $1,000 here? What's $10,000 there? So you have folks that just start spending. And then you have this second group that does the exact opposite. And they get this money and they are so terrified to do anything with it, because they haven't ever seen this much money before, and they don't want to screw it up, right? They want to make it last, but they don't want to make a mistake. And so they're kind of paralyzed by that. And so they don't move forward. In both of these situations, working with a financial planner, working with a financial advisor can alleviate a lot of the stress and a lot of the mistakes, and really a lot of the landmines that folks typically walk into when they receive this level of wealth, right? Because if you're working with a financial advisor earlier, like before you get that money, before you get that award, right? Before you're kind of tainted by seeing those dollars, you are clear-eyed and you can say, okay, what do we need this money for? Is it for, you know, is it income replacement, right? Are we going to be able to walk to work again? Is it, you know, what are the medical expenses? And you sit with a client in a clear-eyed way after developing a relationship, and you just sketch out what those earmarks need to be, right? And then you sit and you develop a relationship and you say, okay, well, we have this money here. We have these different buckets, right? Allocated for these different avenues, these different expenses. Tell me about your values. Like this is an opportunity to bring your family or to make a real difference for not just you, but the next generation. So let's talk about your values. Let's talk about, what you would love for this money to do for you. Let's not just talk about the cars. Let's talk about, let's talk about education, right? Let's talk about what we can do to bring our whole family up, right? To invest in our family. And you have a clear-eyed conversation about those things, because, when this award comes, you can't just say, 100% of this money is going to go towards, medical expenses. We're not going to let you touch it, right? No, we're going to try to grow this wealth. We're trying to grow these assets so that you can make up for that, that 30 to 40% fee that you paid the attorneys. We're going to try to gross that up over time, so that $11 million award that you received in aggregate, that's now, let's say it's 6 or so. We're going to do what we can to grow that money back to that 11 million in a conservative, in a prudent fashion, right? But we're also going to make sure that your basic necessities are covered. And you have an objective person here with a certified financial planner with an MBA in finance, that's going to not just do a back of the envelope estimate, but is going to sit down and really dig through the numbers and crunch the numbers to help you feel more confident that you have this taken care of. So you can focus on your health, right? The client can focus on their health and getting better and progressing, and not focus on, what's going to happen with this money. And I think the last thing that I'll say that I think a financial planner and a financial advisor can help in these situations, when this award comes, and I've seen it, you have clients who have this money and family and friends are going to come knocking, right? Even people that you haven't seen in years are going to come knocking, right? They're going to, hey, I got this business idea. Why don't you invest? We could triple our money. And for some people, it's very hard to say no.
Sure.
I'm the guy that says no. Right?
Yeah.
You say, hey, I'm working with a financial advisor. I'm working with a financial planner. Let me talk with him, and I can be the bad guy, right? I'm happy to be the bad guy, and it gives the client an opportunity to offload those decisions and offload that stress, right? Because I have no problem saying, no, it's not in the plan. So I think working with a financial planner or working with a financial advisor is a way to relieve some of the stress that a client will have, and also provide objective advice to make sure the money lasts and it does what it's intended to do.
Yeah, I like that. I've been, I always kind of scribble these notes down while we're talking about this stuff, because, the information is always so fascinating. And there's two elements that I really liked about what you were talking about. Number one was clear-eyed, and then, number two was the caring aspect of it. Because when we think about, there's such a difference between the fact that, let's say I, write an app and sell it. Now I'm sitting on $10 million, right? I'm certainly going to knock on your door and say, Brian, what do we do with all of this money? My views, my thoughts, my intentions, my experience is incredibly different than a person who's been severely injured from some type of, product liability or motor vehicle accident or whatever might have brought them into this situation. So the moment that occurs, they then are putting their lives in the hands of the lawyer. And, with the civil litigation, there's no constitutional, binding that it has to be timely. The criminal side, the Constitution certainly, demands, and rightly so, that there should be a timely trial. And so, from my experience, certainly, consulting on these types of civil litigations, there's a 3-year, the longest one I ever worked on was 7 years. That was an incredibly long litigation. And during that period of time, the client puts their lives, in a sense, in the hands of the trial team that's supporting them. They're making lots of decisions. They're even, at times putting out their own money, if there's a contingency fee agreement that is there. The point being, though, that the client is being cared for. And that then when the litigation ends, either via settlement or through some type of jury recovery, that caring relationship stops. Mm-hmm. and the person is, you know, basically left with, you know, what do I do next? Well, you know, you're supposed to pay your medical bills, and you're supposed to have the money in the bank, and the money is supposed to cover your lost wages, right? And wait a second, now I'm getting bills from the insurance company because the insurance company, you know, filed a lien on the case, and you know, it wants to negotiate, you know, some form of reimbursement for the series of surgeries that have occurred, let alone this possible surgeries that, you know, might occur. So like, you know, when you get a fusion in your back, there's a great potential that you're going to have degradation a few discs above, and you're going to have degradation a few discs below. And so, you know, those surgeries might be $100,000 a pop, just to make my math easy. So then all of a sudden now there's $200,000 that's also earmarked for these surgeries, and that they might be 25 years, or no, it's probably too much of an exaggeration, might be 15 years into the future, depending upon the type of injury, you know, you see that degradation. And that, you know, you brought up such wonderful things about what happens to a person when they sit on this kind of money, and the belief that it'll last forever. So it's, you know, that's 10 years out. I don't have to worry about that, you know. My family's never been on a vacation, so it's time for us to just go on a gigantic vacation and for us to enjoy ourselves. And that people do forget that money is never, you know, infinite. It's always finite. Even $10 million is finite, you know. And we see it in litigation all the time when a person makes $65,000 a year and they're in their 30s and they're going to retire, you know, at close to 70. And when you you know, add up all of their wages, that might only, you know, eke out to like, you know, 1.75 or $2.1 million.
Yeah.
So you can see kind of how finite that is.
Mm-hmm.
But before I digress and sidebar too much, I mean, I really like the idea around the caring environment and the supportive environment that a person continues to need once they have seen, you know, this kind of money. I like that a lot. I like it too that you know, for a lot of these people, it's a first-time experience. So I just want to know a little bit more about sort of, how do I want to phrase this? I think I want to know a little bit more about, you know, what you do with individuals when they experience, you know, their first-time wealth folks. You know, what's the content that you talk to them about, and what are just, you know, just a couple of examples, and what are a couple of examples of things that you do to create a caring environment? I mean, you certainly talked about, you know, being able to be the person who says no, which I think is, you know, very important. We all need a person like that in our lives. We all need a little bit of management from time to time. But maybe you could just expand a little bit more on those two pieces, because I find those to be, you know, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I really like what you said. This may be the first time that these folks have dealt with a financial planner or a financial advisor. And, you know, I'll be frank with you. I mean, I've been in the industry for a long time, and I'll be frank with you. Sometimes financial services companies have not treated certain communities in the right way, right?
Sure.
So some communities are just automatically they see a guy like me come in and they're just turned off, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. They shut down. And so what's really important for me to do when working with clients that come into the Sudden Wealth that aren't particularly familiar with kind of the industry and the processes, it's just, you know, you lay down the jargon, you talk in plain terms, and I don't talk about, you know, I don't come in and talk about expenses and income and all those types of things first. I sit down and I just have a conversation. Tell me about you. Tell me about your background. Tell me about your family. I am big on relationship building, because I don't think you get anywhere with any client unless you're building a relationship from the beginning. I don't come in as if I know everything. I don't come in and direct. I come in and listen. And I think that is sorely lacking in the industry. And I think it is a critical piece. Probably the most important piece is to gain that trust, right? Because they're going to trust you with these resources that they've never had before, right? It's an immense amount of wealth that they are now sitting on, and they are thinking about entrusting you with it, right? And the only way that they're going to feel comfortable with that, like I said in my first or second answer, we can help relieve some stress. The only way that you can relieve that stress, if they are confident and if you have a relationship with that client, right? Then they'll feel comfortable, and then they'll be able to let their guard down and say, okay, I'm going to focus on healing. I'm going to focus on, moving forward. I'm going to focus on, if there's any mental health things that they need to go through, all those things they need to focus on. So I come in and I just ask questions about that, and also a big question is, what has been your relationship with money? Have you, just because you're coming in this sudden wealth does not mean that you're bad with money, right? It doesn't, just because you've never had this amount of wealth before, it doesn't mean you're bad with money. It can mean that for some folks, but it doesn't mean that for everyone, right? And so I think it's really important to get an idea of kind of where they are, right, in their money journey, so that you can meet them where they are. And so when I talk to clients, I just put the pad down, put the pen down, and I just say, hey, just tell me about yourself. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your kids. Tell me about your parents. Tell me about where you were raised and how you were grown up, and tell me what's important to you. And I think, spending more time up front having those conversations pays off dividends down the road. And so that's where I start the conversation. And then after that, we can get into the planning. We can talk about, the assets that you have today. We can talk about your goals and objectives for the future. We can talk about, future cash flows and expenses that we want to allocate resources towards. We can talk about all of that. But I think if you don't have that first piece, the trust, and have that relationship, and I like my clients, I want to have clients that I could see as friends, really. I like to have that relationship, because this is an ongoing relationship. This isn't a one and done, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Get a plan and then, send you on your way, or talk to you like twice a year. This is an ongoing relationship. So if you're going to invest in that relationship, you need to know everything, as much as you can, about who that person is today and who they want to be in the future. So that's really my approach, and how I kind of start to develop the relationship early on. And then we get to the planning, and then we get to the evaluation and the analysis and the recommendations and the implementation, and then the monitoring and ongoing advice. Like, we'll get to that, but you have to start with the relationship.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. There's a couple of things that really, triggered in my mind as you just beautifully talked about, the continued relationship, and specifically the pieces around putting the pen down, moving the pad to the side, getting the eye-to-eye contact, and really getting to know the people that you're going to serve. I just, to me, that is so pinnacle. When I first started this business, I did a lot of witness prep, and I still continue to do a lot of witness preparation. And my skill and areas in that has, my style has evolved over time, as it should. And I found, and frankly, I really just kind of stumbled onto this fact, but I found exactly what you were talking about. Put the pen, put the pad to the side, find out who these people are. Who are you? What are your hopes? What are your fears? What do you believe in? What do you hold strongest? How do you handle conflict? How do you, speak up for yourself, or do you not speak up for yourself? What are all of these different pieces? And I have found over time that working with a witness in that way empowers them to perform very well in trial and perform very well in deposition, because you're not trying to feed them all kinds of information that's very difficult for them to wrap their heads around during a trying time. And just because trial's over and you win doesn't mean that the trying times end. In fact, the new set of trying times are beginning as you're learning how to navigate life, not just with this extra wealth, but with all of the changes that have occurred in your life. And so it's beautiful and wonderful to see that you spend so much time helping to get to know who your clients are so that you can help them with support their strengths and navigate them through their areas of weakness so that they can continue to do, which is another thing you talked about, which is absolutely phenomenal, is regrow the wealth. Because you're 100% correct. If it's a $10 million jury verdict and the average, fee on contingency is around 43%, so that's $430,000. Or sorry, it's $4.3 million. There's my math goes again. $4.3 million that comes out of that, a $10 million verdict. And then there's also other trial expenses. Like if I was on there, then the client is paying some through, that's paying me through those funds. If there were 2 or 3 experts, medical bills, all of a sudden, all of that money shrinks. And on top of that, whenever a financial, a life care planner testifies in court, they talk about the entire lifespan. They talk about all the expenses in the entire lifespan. And then after they come up with this gigantic number, they reduce everything back down to a present dollar value. And they do that. And they explain it very clearly while they're on the stand giving their testimony. We do this because we assume that that money is going to be invested. And if that money is going to be invested, it's going to grow. And that the goal is that when a person dies, that in the account is zero. I mean, from the life care planner's view. And I guess the reason I kind of talk about this is because of that second piece. When a jury awards a person $10 million, $11 million, $100 million, they're doing that because they understand the necessity of giving that person a leg up. That something has happened that has inhibited their ability to get out and work, and to get out and, basically pay their taxes, all the kinds of necessary things that we need for our society to keep going. And that the lifelong kind of caring package, I guess for the sake of a better word, is phenomenal, because it's not just about their support and it's not just about building back their wealth. It's really about a much more community-oriented drive to help people who a jury has said wanted to be helped. And that the path shouldn't end at the moment that the jury delivers their verdict. The path shouldn't end at the moment that a trial lawyer cuts a check out of escrow, right, and gives you that money. And what it must look like. I mean, I remember the first time I got a big check from work and I took a picture of it. I was so excited. I was so excited when I saw the numbers in that check. And at the same time knowing, boy, this check looks great, but I might not get paid for another 6 months. So what does that look like? And so you talked a little bit about stable investments. And since we're talking a bit about what a financial road looks like and supporting a person and carrying forward the mandate, I think is a good word for it, the mandate that a jury gives when they give this award and carrying forward this mandate. Can you just talk to me a little bit about the difference between what we see as kind of these stable investments and what, I think we'll just go with that. Just talk to me a bit about, how this entire process of stable investments and why they're important and what kind of growth you see and why you would recommend that a person who's received $10 million would want to and should invest that in stable investments over some higher risk ones where you really could start seeing the money grow quickly.
Yeah. Great question, Peter. And of course, you asked me this in a week when the stock market is all over the place. We're talking about stable investments. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. This money, this pot is designed to make up for these lost expenses or these
Mm-hmm.
lost income or medical
Right.
expenses. It's not all just to, go to Disney and or go to Bora Bora, right? These are
Right, right, right,
for actual expenses that you have or replace income that you won't be receiving, right?
right.
Because there's that present value calculation, you at least want to grow those assets at the rate of inflation, right?
Mhm.
One of the things that you want to do when you or a planner would want to do when they look at this pot is say, okay, let's differentiate. Where do we need guaranteed income? And by guaranteed income, I mean, an annuity, right?
Right.
That is gonna pay every month, just like a paycheck. Now you want to
Mhm.
have a slice, and more in most cases, you want to have a slice of an annuity that's going to pay that income because for a lot of clients, they're not going to they're not going to have an income, or their income is going to be significantly reduced, right?
Mhm.
So you lock
Right.
that in. Now there's another portion of the portfolio where you're going to say, okay, I don't want to put too much of this at risk, but I do want to get some growth, maybe a little bit greater growth than inflation. I mean, right now inflation is a little under 2%, let's say. Maybe you want a little bit more than inflation. And I will say, working with an advisor is great for this because you'll have clients that come into a lot of wealth that just want to swing for the fences. They say,
Sure.
look, I already took that 40% haircut. Tesla's at whatever, it doubles every 2 days. Let me just throw everything in Tesla. You don't want to do that, right? And you want a planner to say you don't want to do that. You want to have a diversified portfolio of both stocks and bonds, right? Depending on the age of the client, that mix will change, right? If the client is a lot younger, then you may want to have more growth potential. Again, not aggressive, but just a bit more growth potential because it has to grow for a longer. You get the benefit of compounding,
Sure.
right? And it growing
Absolutely.
for a longer period of time. They have a longer time horizon to make up for any short-term volatility like we're seeing this week.
Yeah.
But you also want to have bonds in that portfolio that again pay an income, right? They pay a consistent income, but they're not as volatile as stocks.
Mhm.
So it's a mix. It's tough to give a paint a broad brush because everybody's situation is different. But you do want to look at locking in that guaranteed income, and then you want to look at a diversified basket of stocks and bonds so that you can get some growth potential, but not too much, right? Not take on too much risk,
Right.
have some sense of stability because again, these funds are designed to pay for the most part, specific expenses or make up for specific income loss. So
Right.
you don't want to swing for the fences because you see that growth potential, but it could also fall, right? And if you're pulling from
Right.
those assets, if you're needing to pull from those assets when it's at a trough, when it's at the bottom, you increase exponentially the likelihood that you run out of money, right? And so as a planner, we have to take those things into account. And it's again that initial conversation saying that, look, I know you're hearing every day about these stocks that are doing really well and they're growing, but they could also come down. We're going to provide rigor and sophistication around developing this portfolio, and then we're going to implement. And these are your expected returns over time. And this is what we're going to hold as our benchmark to say whether or not we're doing a good job.
I like it. Yeah. I mean, as you talk, I just, in my mind, I just kind of think going over and over again that the importance of this match, and that it's fascinating to me, hearing some of the parallels between the relationship between attorney as counselor in guiding their client through advice around decision-making processes, and how important that needs to continue once the trial is over. And that, the more we talk about this, the more I really think, wow, there really is this major change and this major gap that can occur really at a moment. That's nothing to do with the attorneys. The attorneys get hired to do their job, and when their job ends, right? I mean, that's it. I mean, it's just sort of the nature of the beast. And that, I think, is a lot of my thinking as to why we're here having this discussion today is because it's important to make sure that we fill that gap and that we bridge this process so that when the attorney's job is over, that discussions have already occurred, agreements have already been made, you already understand each other. So it's the seamless transition from a movement of, okay, we've settled this case. Now we know exactly where, the check's going to go. It's going to go into an escrow account. And I've already spoken to Brian, and, we've already talked about how we're going to branch all of these kinds of things out. And, I told Brian I've never been to Puerto Rico, and I always wanted to go. And so, we agreed that, I'll take a little money out to do something fun. I have this friend, and he's a successful businessman. He's a very successful businessman. And, he started out, not super impoverished, but, his family, he had food on the table every day. We'll say that, there always was a meal that he could eat. And that extraneous money was something that he never really experienced. And as I started this business, he always said that, when a big pay comes in, you should take a small portion of it, not huge. You should just take a tiny percentage of that and then just do something fun with it. Just to satisfy that idea that you have, you've windfalled on a check, take a little money, go on a vacation or something like that. Treat your family to something nice so that you can answer some of those desires, but answer some of those desires in a way that is more controlled. Because it sounds like in what you're talking about is that for certain individuals, and we sort of talked about the two extremes, right? Some that become total spendthrifts and some that just are like, let's just, open up the floodgates and let's just have a good time, because the money will always be there. It sounds to me like part of your role is to really help see into the future as best you can about what these pitfalls might be that a person might run into. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the value of working with an experienced planner and experienced advisors, we've seen a lot, right? We've seen those pitfalls. We've seen those landmines that clients walk into. A lot of times I'm working with clients after they walk into those landmines, and I got to, clean everything up. And so, because I have that experience, I can clearly relay that to clients and say, hey, if you continue on this path, or if you make this decision, this is likely to happen, right? And just having that conversation where they can say, oh, all right, well, what can I do then? Or what's the right decision to make? And again, that's my role as an objective kind of third party coming in saying, hey, this is a sound plan. This is a great plan. I understand, these are some other things that you want to do. And then, it's not always about shutting things down, right? If a client comes in and they have an idea and they want to do something, should be happy to work with that client and say, okay, well, this might be a better way to go about it. Or this is how I've seen clients do this and be successful, right? Because I have that wisdom of the experience. But you're 100% right. When they get that, that sum, it's perfectly fine to say, hey, let's peel off a little bit of this and just go have fun. Let's feed that urge. Let's just have fun with it. Then let's come back and then get laser targeted on our plan, because you don't want to deprive. I mean, some of these trials and some of these cases can be just mentally taxing, right? They can go on forever. Yeah. And so, you finally get those funds. You don't want to say, no. Put it on an annuity. You don't want to do that. We're putting it all in the market. We want to say, okay, well, let's let you have some fun with some of this money. Take your family, go on vacation. I'll work on a plan here. And then once you get back, let's regroup and let's talk. And then we can start to implement. Because you don't want to deprive, because in that case, you're constantly going to be in conflict if you go about that way. If you don't let them, take some of those funds and do something, whatever they want with it.
Sure. No, absolutely. As you talk about this, it reminds me that, one of the pitfalls that, we experience when making recommendations like, look, there could be a lot of money. There's the potential that the defense is going to say to you, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Jones, what are you going to do when you get all of this money? I would say probably, I mean, the way that, my system works is that I do attend a trial with the trial team, just, analyze what's going on strategy-wise on a day-to-day basis. And so I always find that, I'd say I have 56, I think, trials, actual physical trials that I've been to. And I'd say about half, the defense has asked the question, well, your attorney stood in front of this jury, the jury standing behind me, and is asking for, $28 million. What do you plan on doing with that $28 million? And I will tell you that when the answer is, I have agreed to work with a financial advisor who will manage and control this money, the looks on the jury's faces is always one of relief, in a sense, almost. I don't know if relief is definitely, I'm not sure that's definitely the exact right word I'll say, but that's the best kind of word that I can come up with. There's a sense of connection and understanding, maybe a relief in the sense that the person is acting responsibly, because I think that there is a concern, and there's also a whole set of implicit bias and underlying racial overtones that occur, when a plaintiff is a person of color. There's all kinds of implicit bias about, and look, there are times that there's past drug use history, there might be past alcoholism, and juries start to worry and get concerned about, is a person just going to fall off the wagon, and is all this money just going to, be snorted or drank away? And they'll take these things into consideration. And I find that what that does, there's something about, well, I mean, I think we both can agree that money, it has a lot, is very equated to power, and power is often, equated to control. And that on the flip side of that, moving away from the effective technique of a plaintiff saying, well, I'm working with Brian McKinney, and he's from, Grid 202 Partners, and they're an organization that's in multi-states, and he's certified, and he's going to help me manage this money, and I've signed an agreement, and we're contracted and ready to go, has so much power. On the other side, because there's power on that, and as you mentioned, litigations are emotional roller coasters, and that there's often a feeling of being out of control as a person either being sued or suing someone else, that when the money comes, the last thing they want to do is give up control of that money. And I think that is a pitfall and area that attorneys, especially trial lawyers, have run into when trying to talk to their clients about doing this. That's why I really like what you said about your willingness and ability to come in and sit down and talk to a person first. It also gives the trial lawyer a chance to act as an advocate for their client. And really represent their client while you're in that room, asking questions that maybe their client wouldn't necessarily think about asking, and talking with the client and with you to be able to, make a learned decision. I mean, there's been times in cases that I have worked on where, for various reasons, I've had to contract not with the law firm, but directly with the client. And when that has occurred, the trial lawyer has acted as a representative of their client in asking, me tough questions, which is fine and appropriate, and they should, because that's their role, to ensure that the client's going to get what they need. And so, the relationship piece you're talking about, I think, really helps in that process? It sounds like from what you're discussing that you believe in kind of the shared control process with the money. And so I just would like you to just expand a little bit on, your process around working with clients and sharing the responsibility and sharing the control of the money.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that came to mind when you were talking about the attorney being able to ask tough questions, one of the things that I should have said is that at Grid 202 Partners, we are fiduciaries. We are not, and as a certified financial planner, I'm a fiduciary, so I'm required to put the client's interest above my own. Now that's different for brokers. They have a suitability standard, which is a lesser standard than a fiduciary. So that's one of the things I think that makes us different is that we are required, mandated to put the client's interests above our own. But as far as the process of shared decisions, I come in as almost a subject matter expert on financial planning, financial advising, on investing matters. And then they come in as an expert on themselves, right? They come in talking about, what their hopes, what their dreams are, what their values are, what they want to get accomplished. And then we work in partnership. It's not just me dictating, it's me taking that information in, adding some rigor and some financial planning, some financial analysis around that, in addition to, sketching out, or not even sketching out, but detailing, future cash flows and future needs. And then we work together to come up with a plan. And it's not my plan, right? I'm not coming up with my plan. I'm coming up with our plan in partnership, right? And it has to be that buy-in there, even from early on, because that's the only way that you're gonna be successful, right? That's the only way the client is gonna be successful, is if there's buy-in from the beginning. And the only way that you do that, right, is by using their insight and their input and their experiences and incorporating that into the plan, into the recommendations. There's really no other way.
Yeah, I like that. I just, I can't emphasize enough the elements of partnership and how important that is, so that people just don't feel isolated, alone, overwhelmed, underwhelmed, anxious. There's just such a myriad. It's certainly empowered. There's just a myriad of things. And since we're in the conversation of talking a bit about, this control piece and really more of this partnership piece and your responsibilities about the level of where the client sits in terms of, who comes first. I did want to ask you a bit about, just sort of a basic way. I mean, would you be responsible for paying bills? How does that process work?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. So we would be responsible for definitely the investment assets. We'd be responsible for managing the financial plan.
Mm-hmm.
We could be responsible for paying those bills and paying those expenses. It just depends on kind of the needs of the specific client, and everyone is different. But we could take that approach and take that responsibility off the back of the clients. What I know for a lot of people, that would be a huge relief, because for these awards, with all the medical expenses, those bills could be piling up. They could be coming every which way, right? So we could take on that responsibility. Another thing I'll say is, like, the taxes are another thing. A lot of folks who haven't had that level of wealth before aren't familiar with the level of taxation and the number of forms to have to file. And so we would work to partner with a CPA firm to file those tax returns and get that additional responsibility taken off the back of the client.
Yeah, boy, you bring up a great point. I mean, if you are not going to be able to work to the level you once were, or you're not going to be able to work at all, and you all of a sudden are sitting with a check in your hands just for the lost wages component of that, let's say it's just, again, for me to make math easy, right, $2 million, you are looking then at income. I mean, that, certain elements unlike a lottery winning, right? You win the lottery, it's $100 million. You don't want to take the annuity. You want to take your chunk.
Yeah.
Your chunk is 50 million. All of a sudden, like 20 million is gone, because of taxes. Certain elements of, what obviously a plaintiff would recover is not taxed,
Yep.
yet lost wages, and then, we're not even talking about the interest income yet,
Yeah, exactly.
we're just talking about, just this $2 million in lost wages. That crap isn't free. There's taxes that need to be paid on that. And so I would assume there would need to be ways to be able to invest as much of that as possible to shelter from as much taxes as possible. And then B, to sort of help prepare for, okay, we're going to lose a chunk of this in taxes. So now what are we going to do to invest in a way to rebuild what was lost?
Yep, exactly. And you have to do it. You have to balance the risk and the return, right? You want to gross that up and you want to make up for that, but at the same time, you don't want to take undue risk.
Right.
And that's kind of the benefit of working with the expertise of a financial planner, because we can do that, and we build those portfolios all the time.
Now, since the company that you work for, the Grid 202, do they do work nationally?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, we do work nationally. We have clients across the country.
All right, fantastic. And now you specifically, would you be able to work with clients nationally, or are you? Yes. Okay. Yes. All right. Because that's the thing, is that, it's obviously, we're here in Denver, Colorado, and this city and state has grown immensely. We don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic financially, and if we're going to see a lot of flight out again. But certainly with all of the growth that we have had, we have certainly seen litigation in this state change and certainly I've seen it in the last 11 years, from, counties giving $1 million verdicts and us clapping our hands like, God, we got this jury to agree to $1 million to settlements in the state now. There's a firm that I work for from time to time that had an incredible case, and they were able to settle it for $26 million. And so, we've seen this huge explosion in the state. So, I just want to make sure for the people that work with me outside of Colorado, and for anyone who sees this who's outside of Colorado, would be able to say, I could give Brian a call and, talk about, what's happening in Florida, right? Because, Florida, Tennessee, Texas, Chicago, California, certain areas in Colorado, certain areas in Washington state tend to be very big litigation areas. And when I say big litigation areas, I mean that there are lots of big jury verdicts that are returned, and that's why they're larger litigation areas. So it would be great to be able to see you, not just help folks here in Denver and in the state of Colorado, but in other parts of the country too, who, will have their own unique issues and in their own unique states, in their own unique kind of ways.
Yep. Yeah, I am able to work with folks across the country. It's all about a conversation, just trying to understand the details of that particular client situation, that particular state, and we can get it done. Perfect.
Brian, this has been just a wonderfully enlightening conversation. And I really, I think in my mind, as we were talking about doing this, in my mind, I'm thinking, right, financial advising, it is one of those pieces that I recommend all of the time. I just am at a place where I recommend it to every trial team. I just say, look, if we're going to be asking for a large figure, I just think that, we should be talking about financial management, and we should be, using that, as I talked about, as a trial technique, so that we can, inform the jury how this money is going to be handled and how this money is going to be monitored, instead of controlled. I'm going to say monitored instead, because I think that's more of an accurate term. And then as the conversation has emerged, there are new ideas and thoughts that I didn't even really, think about in terms of especially the bridging of the gap. And in listening to the way that you describe how you choose to want to do your business and how you choose to focus on individuals and understanding individuals and incorporating that into your own fiduciary responsibilities, and also a drive to help individuals in communities that might not have ever seen wealth before, or might not understand how to manage that wealth and how to help them understand how to pay it forward for their own families. Your effort and your energy and your desire and focus just seems to be a way to help pay it forward, to end that gap that exists with what does a person do when all of their, once they have this giant bag of money to cover medical expenses and lost wages and pain and suffering and permanent disfigurement and all the other things that, a person is receiving all this money for. I mean, for me, it really, I think, intensified the necessity for bridging this gap to ensure that people are just well taken care of, and ensuring the mandate that a jury gives occurs. And I think it's really you who can carry forward that mandate that the jury has spoken.
Yeah. Well said, Peter. I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm just trying to help, I'm just trying to use my expertise, my experience, and what I've learned over the years to help folks. If that helps, people get a larger jury award, that's great. But I am trying to just help them reach their full potential and not have as much stress managing these huge awards. And I know that it is taken care of and in good hands.
Yeah, I love it. And when you talk about that growth of full potential, I mean, we operate, my company does, and a lot of the trial lawyers that we work with, operate on this story model method. And what we've presented to the jury is the hero's journey, and how this person was in a certain place and moving forward, and now isn't and can't, and needs to get back to moving forward again. And that and we talk to the jury about how that is something that can't be done alone, and that it takes the jury, it takes the jury's willingness to work with that person to ensure that they have what they need. And then it just seems so logical that the next step would then be for you to be there to ensure that that happens for a life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Brian, man, thank you very much. This is just, it's been, personally, I love these things. And, this definitely is one that, I'm definitely going to leave this conversation thinking and changed. And certainly, how I'm going to be talking to trial lawyers about other areas as to why, this is so important, so necessary. So, just from a, personal and business standpoint of view, I want to thank you very much for providing that for me, and also for the wide audience that's going to get an opportunity to hear the wonderful things that you've had to say.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Peter. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. Well, thank you.